Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. And later, if you're watching the replay, tonight we have Gary Corbin with us. Gary has had his books in our store for a while now, and so we're super excited that the most recent book in the series that he's been working on for a few years is out in the world, and you can purchase it at the bookstore. Um, it's called Under the Banner of Valor. We're going to talk about that a little bit more. But the first thing I'm going to ask Gary to do tonight, I also asked him to do when he was in the store the other day, is it's been a little while since there's been a new book in this series. So can you talk a little bit about the entire, like the main character and sort of the setup for the entire series before we jump to the most recent book?
Sure. So thanks for having me. I'm really pleased to be doing this again. The new, I should mention, the new book is the fifth one in this series, the Valerie Dawes thrillers. And Valerie Dawes is a young policewoman. At the beginning of the series, she's a brand new cop in a fictional town of Clayton, Connecticut, a sort of a grimy uh, former industrial town in Western Connecticut, loosely based on the city of Hartford, but with a number of liberties taken. um, and so she grew up there, and as a young girl, two very big things happened to her that set her life on a new course. One is that she was abused as a 12-year-old girl by a family friend. And just a few weeks after that, her hero, her mentor, her sort of godfather and uncle and namesake, Valentine, similar name, was killed in the line of duty as a policeman. And both of these events sort of set her on the path to sort of avenging her own victimization and her uncle's. And she decides at an early age she wants to be a detective just like him and stop killers and specifically stop men who commit violence against women as best she can. So in the first book, she's a rookie cop and she's learning the ropes, and a serial rapist is on the loose, and she is hunting him down. Her partner gets shot in the line of duty, so she's kind of on her own a little bit for a while, and has to come to terms with her own anger over her situation in life. And when she does confront the bad guy, it becomes a very tense moment for her. What is she going to do? The next book in the series is actually a prequel. It flashes back to when she's in college and she's still contemplating, do I really want to do this or not? And a friend of hers has her baby kidnapped, and she gets involved in solving that. And she decides, yeah, this is really what I want to do. In the next book in the series, called The Better Part of Valor, she gets assigned to a task force which is all about stopping violence against women. And the mayor, who is a woman, has created this task force, but she lets her husband be the chair of the Citizen Oversight Board, and he can't help himself. He's always getting in the way of their investigations. And again, there's in this case, a serial killer, and all of his efforts seem to be making it harder rather than easier to find the killer. In the fourth book, Valerie's long-lost mother returns. And this book is called Mother of Valor because it's largely about her sort of getting to know her mother again. However, at the same time, she and her task force have been assigned tracking down a radical group that has threatened to attack the city's 4th of July celebration with massive violence. And so she really has to focus on that, but she also has her mother there who she really doesn't know. her mother left shortly after those big events in her life happened when she was about 13. And then in this, then we have this book, Under the Banner of Valor, which also takes on some radical fringe groups who are taking aim at family planning clinics and stopping women from entering them in order to get reproductive health care, whatever form that they're seeking. The shooter assumes they're all going in for abortions and wants to kill them before they can kill their babies, which, of course, makes no sense, but,
Yeah.
these people don't always.
Yes. So I'm really curious. Like clearly the women's issues in this book are important. And I'm wondering what was the catalyst for you to take on some of these topics with this character, Valerie?
A lot of it just stems from what's going on in the world. And some of it just had to do with when creating this character, thinking about what sort of things would she care most about. And, uh, you know, the idea for this book, writers aren't supposed to talk about this, but the idea for this book actually came from my father, who, everybody comes up to a writer and says, I've got a great idea for a book. And my response is always, then write it. I've got
Yes,
plenty of ideas.
I say the same thing.
Yeah.
That would be your book,
Um,
not my book.
yeah. But I knew my dad wasn't going to do that.
Yeah.
He was actually battling cancer at the end of his life. And actually, the idea that he had was really good. I said, wow, well, why don't we work on it together? So we talked it through and decided that, what would motivate her would be something that happened to her early in her life. And, we came up with, the abuse that she suffered and the death of her mentor. And I just continued with that, thinking, how would this motivate her otherwise in her career? What sort of issues would she care most about? How would this affect her on the job performance? And how would it affect her maturing into a young woman, um, especially given the career and especially a male dominated field like policing,
Yeah.
where um, women don't always, or women often don't get treated equally or
Yeah.
with the same respect and aren't given the same opportunity. So she would have the glass ceiling to be fighting
Yeah.
against as well. Um, and this was confirmed with interviews that I had with police women on the job who, told me sort of what life is like, you know, coming up in the world, being a police officer as a woman, the battles they face, both explicitly and implicitly, trying to get ahead and trying to succeed in their job, and the issues that they confront, like harassment and like the abuse that they get. So it continues for
Yeah.
her as it
Yeah.
does real life policewomen, and I just thought that that sort of intersection of the personal issues that she had and the continuing social and political issues that we have surrounding women's rights, women's access to equal care, to equal power in society, is just so rich. There's so much to work with.
Unfortunately,
It's
but yes.
actually, yeah, it's actually harder to narrow it down.
Yeah. Yeah. So how does
Unfortunately.
that, let's see, I'm trying to figure out how to word this way, the way I really mean it, but like as a person who doesn't identify as a woman, how does
Mhm.
that, what's challenging about that? And then how do you overcome those challenges?
Everything's challenging about it.
Yeah.
Not having the experience of being a woman in society, never having confronted the same obstacles and the same challenges, always having the more privileged position as a white male, middle class,
Yeah.
just name your preferred privilege. I probably grew up with it, except wealth.
Yeah. Yeah.
um, so I mean, everything really is challenging about, and the thing that I've tried to do is uh, constantly check myself um, by having conversations with women. I have a wonderful partner who you met in the store, uh, who sets me straight quite a bit. I had six sisters growing up, and a very
That's
strong
useful.
mother. Yeah, and they, beat some sense into me and five of them were
Yeah.
older. You know,
They'll tell
so
you.
they,
They'll tell you what they think.
exactly. But then, even as I write, I make sure I have women readers in the critique group I have. We have worked hard to maintain a balance of genders and perspectives, so that there's always somebody that say, you know what, that is just not how women think, or that's not how women
Yeah.
act in that
Yeah.
situation. And then sometimes I get it right, and they say, hey, that's exactly right. Like, yay.
Yeah.
But it's a constant education, and of course I read and try to educate myself on my own. But there's nothing like having someone who's been through it talk to you about it.
Yeah.
And the sad thing is, in my experience, I've talked to so many women, and I start to talk about the book, and in almost every case, they have a story. Like, how can everyone have a story like this?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's as a man, you think, well, it's sure a lot of women, but it's not a majority. It's not, it's
Yeah.
a small
Yeah.
number. No, it's
Yeah.
overwhelming,
Yeah.
and that's really eye opening.
Yeah. What how let's see. This late and someone asked this in the store, so I was like trying to phrase it a little bit more a little bit more judiciously than they did in the store, but um so I mean just straight up, this, abortion is a hot button topic in the country right now. This is a tough issue for a lot of readers, for a lot of families that maybe have differing opinions and whatnot. And I'm curious what made you go, "Oh, yes, this would be a great a great topic for a book."
Yeah, I'm not sure it is a great topic for a book, but
Yeah, yeah,
we'll see. Um, I again, Valerie's concerns are the issues that face women and their safety, and you know uh, their sort of standing in society. And I don't think there's an issue um, that's hotter for women
yeah,
than having control of their own bodies and feeling safe
yeah,
in making decisions about their own bodies. And her concern isn't about the choices these women are making; it's about keeping them safe so they can make their own choice.
yeah,
But the abortion issue, ever since, I think, certainly since Dobbs came down a couple of years ago, and really for years and years before that, it is a hot topic in society. It's one that people have a lot of strong opinions about. It's one that people often have ambivalent feelings about, and
yeah,
I wanted to explore that in the book. So Valerie actually has very ambivalent feelings about abortion, and in this book, her best friend is pregnant and contemplating that choice. And her first reaction is, "Oh, great, we're going to have a baby."
yeah,
We like, she's somehow part of it, and she can be an auntie, and all this is wonderful. And like, no, no, that's not how this is going to go. And so she has to really confront how she feels about that. Um, she had assumptions about how she would feel that she has a lot of questions about when it comes up. Um, and she really has to grapple quite a bit with it. And she runs into a lot of people in the book who have very different opinions about it. And so
yeah,
part of it is about navigating those different situations as a person and as a policewoman when you really aren't necessarily agreeing with what the person is choosing. And I think that was an important element to include in the story, because it's not all cut and dried.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not one way or the other. A lot of people who are pro-choice would not make that choice
Right.
on their
Right.
own, and I wanted that point of view represented. So I just think there was it was so rich as an issue,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
one that, like it or not, people are thinking about it. People are talking about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Women's safety in this area. Forget about the abortion itself. Just women's
Right.
safety in
Right.
pursuing reproductive health care is at risk in the country,
Yeah.
and getting worse. So for me, it fit perfectly with the type of character she is and the type of um, agenda she has for keeping women safe.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I like that you used it as a sort of a platform to discuss the nuances because I think that a lot of times it gets portrayed in the media as sort of a either or, like it's one way or the other, and for most of us it is somewhere in the middle, and we maybe have different thoughts about different things, and the idea that someone has control over their own choices doesn't necessarily we might make the same choice or whatever, and so I like that
Hmm.
you
Right.
were able to explore that. Um, do you have more plans for Valerie in the future?
I'm currently working on the next book,
Oh,
so I guess
yay,
in that
good.
respect, at least. um, and it's in this one, it takes a little bit different of a turn in that it's not specifically women's safety, but trans and LGBTQ uh, victims in this book. And uh, she has a friend who represents, who's trans, now representing as a woman, hasn't gone through the full transition yet, but who becomes a victim to uh, someone who is rabidly anti-gay and anti-trans, or in this guy's mind, anti-perv. Everything that is not what he is perverted.
Yeah.
Um, so that's about halfway written. At least the first draft is about halfway through that, and having a great time with that story because it is such a new side of her and a new side of this whole equation. It's again not strictly women, but it's
Yeah. Yeah.
definitely the Venn diagrams overlap
Yeah.
quite a bit.
So is this a series you can see yourself going with for a little while, or do you think you'll tie it
I
up at
could,
any point, or
yeah, I could see it going further. I am not sure how much further it will go. She's certainly a character that I enjoy working on. The relationships that she has in her life. She has a boyfriend, a very serious boyfriend, but they're having troubles in this current book. So I'm like, wow, how do I want to pursue that? How do I want to
yeah,
resolve that?
yeah.
Is it something I want to wrap up in this book, or do I want to push it forward? So I could see, you know, definitely this book and maybe one or two more, or maybe it will continue beyond. I also have other ideas though,
Yeah, yeah,
and I had two other series that I worked on, and I always think, well, should I go back to either of those? Maybe the Mountain Man series isn't quite done,
yeah,
or
yeah,
um, I spend uh, about not quite half of my time at the Oregon coast, which is where I am now, actually. Um, and I've always thought, well, this would be a great setting
yeah,
for
yeah,
a new series and some new characters, and maybe take a little bit lighter subject matter. It
yeah.
doesn't always have to be serious police work. So that
Speaking of
that's
settings, how
something
did
for
you
me.
end up setting a book in Connecticut? Is there a personal tie there, or did you just choose it?
Yes, I grew up in New England,
Okay, okay.
a small town right on the border of Massachusetts and Connecticut, and my parents lived for a while in Hartford. And I was originally just going to set it in Hartford, but then I thought, smaller cities don't really like having themselves portrayed as these crime-ridden,
That's
horrible
fair.
places with crooked politicians and police, you know.
Yeah. Oh, that's
Well,
funny.
maybe I can fictionalize,
Well,
and
well,
that gave me
well,
a lot more license
yeah,
to go,
yeah.
you
It
know.
does give you a little more license to make up whatever you want to.
Mhm.
So I'm curious just because I don't read a lot of mysteries and thrillers. What makes something a thriller?
Uh, what makes it a thriller is the high level of suspense that builds through the book that doesn't necessarily relate to solving a particular crime, or you're not trying to crack the mystery per se. You're
Right,
trying
right.
to see how the main character resolves the situation that they're in, which builds. It just
Yeah,
continuously
yeah.
builds until the climax. Um, so, uh, a lot of spy movies are
Yeah,
considered
yeah.
thrillers because you know who the bad guy is, right? Or,
Right, right.
James Bond, you know who the bad guy
Right,
is.
right. Gotcha.
But there's a lot of action. There's a lot of dangerous situations, and no clear way out.
Yeah, yeah.
So those are fun.
Yeah, I was just curious because I know there's a lot of crossover and there's a lot of mysteries that are thrillers, but there are thrillers that aren't mysteries. So
Right,
like a
right.
genre figuring out thing. But and you have self-pubbed these books.
Hmm.
What I'm really curious about, I'm going to totally jump topics here, but I'm really curious how you've seen the ecosystem of indie publishing change because you've been doing this for a little while now, and I'm
Yeah.
wondering if you how you've seen it change over the time that you've been doing it.
It's certainly matured as an industry. The tools have gotten better. The markets have gotten stronger.
Yeah.
Public and buyer acceptance is much higher. Quality has gotten better, and I think that is the reason for all of the above.
Yeah. Yeah.
That you have better books. That indie writers are becoming more serious as a rule about having quality covers, having editors, making sure that the writing is of quality. It used to be that, and to some extent it still is, but it used to be that indie publishing was all just get it out there, publish 20 books a year and sell 100 copies each. And, well, 20 books, 100 copies, that's pretty good,
Yeah.
make a bunch of money. And they didn't worry about quality. And I think that image and that reality both have shifted
Yeah.
considerably.
Yeah.
Um, the big change in self-publishing was Amazon getting into the business, and with Create Space and Kindle. Um, they made the on-ramp very easy for
Yeah.
writers to use. It and plus, they gave you an instant marketplace.
Yeah.
Um, but the others in the market, the Lulus and the Kobos and Draft to Digital and Smashwords and all the others, I think have created enough competition to keep Amazon honest, which
Yeah.
is hard to do. um, you monopolies are tough to rein in. But and then of course in the audio world, the when audiobooks started getting popular and Findaway Voices came on the scene, making it easy for self-published authors to self-record and produce audiobooks.
Oh.
That was a whole new element too, where you have this completely new income stream and completely new format to reach people with. Things like Libby come along for libraries to use to sell ebooks and audiobooks. Sell per se, they
Yeah.
buy
Yeah.
them
I
and
knew what you
lease them out.
meant.
But I think it helped make all of these things much more accessible to readers, and readers have discovered uh, indie publishers can be every bit as good as,
Yeah.
if
Oh,
not
for
better
sure.
than,
Yeah. Yeah.
traditional. If
Yeah.
you remember early John Grisham, he was terrible. The stories were fabulous, but the writing was crap. And now, he's I read his books and go, wow, he's learned how to write, or
Yeah.
he hired an
Yeah.
editor, or whatever. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, so the whole market has really gotten better. But
Yeah. Yeah.
some of these big name writers, I mean, they would struggle if they were doing it on their own. So
Yeah.
th- there's a real different skill set involved with self-publishing
Yes.
versus
Absolutely.
traditional. Um, at the same time, traditional publishing has moved closer to the indie publishing
Yeah.
model. The author is now responsible for a lot of their own marketing and
Yeah.
getting the book ready for publication, and getting involved in the production process, and far more responsible for their book's success than it used to be.
Yeah.
So the line has gotten very thin between the
Yeah,
two.
it's been interesting from, just I'm always interested in it from a bunch of different angles as a writer, and I do some editing, and having the bookseller angle come in the last few years. It's been interesting to see the changes. Um,
Yeah.
and to see a lot of the indie publishers, I think the ones that can successfully take on those different roles, because you essentially are taking you're being your own copy editor, or you're hiring one, and you're being your own editor, or you're hiring one, or and you're being your own cover designer. Like, you're responsible for that, whether you're
Hmm.
farming it out or not, or hiring other
Right.
people. Um, and not all of us have the skill set to do all those things.
Right.
So, and actually I think very few people do have the skill set to do all those things. And I think the indie publishers who are doing really well are the ones that are going, oh, I can't do that, but I'm going to have this person do this and this person do this. And,
Right.
you're essentially
Right. I can't
taking
do
on the
covers.
same roles. Yeah. Yeah. No, me neither. Yeah. But it's been fun to see that growth in that, where there's been a realization that it's really not um in many cases it's not a quality difference at all in the story and the writing. It's just the path that people choose to take. And I do see some people still doing it where they're like, I don't want to mess with that process of submitting or whatever. So I'm just going to do it myself. But then they don't really do it as well as they could. And so there is still some of that happening, but there's so many more people using those indie platforms to turn out some really fabulous stuff. So
Yeah. Yeah. It's really project management when it
yeah,
comes down to it.
yeah, yeah,
And luckily, I had that experience in my former
yeah.
career.
I was
So
curious, like, what's the hardest part about that for you? Um, like,
the
what's
public,
the hardest part about being the one that has to do all of the jobs, and how do you overcome that or manage that for yourself?
the hardest part for me is figuring out the marketing. Even though I've been a
Yeah.
marketer,
Yes. Yeah.
and had a lot of success in doing that. For books, it's such a saturated market.
Yeah.
Um, Supply is massive.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
number of competitors are massive. Just figuring out and staying on top of the marketing. There's so many different things you can do, and which ones are the right ones.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think for me that's the toughest. The things like finding an editor, finding a cover person, all of that sort of thing. You know, that you know, I've been doing that sort of stuff forever.
Yeah. Yeah.
Finding a contractor to do a specific thing.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
unless you're willing to spend a lot of money on marketing, you really have to do a lot of it yourself. It's hard to
Yeah.
sub that
Yeah.
out,
Yeah.
and it's like the massive ocean, and you're challenging yourself to swim
Yeah.
across.
Yeah. No, I think that's probably the most daunting part of it for most of us, is just that, there's so many. I tell people when they come in the store, as soon as your book's on the shelf, if you're a mystery writer, you are now on the shelf with, James Patterson and Don
Yeah,
Winslow and all these other people, and that's fine. And that doesn't just diminish your work at all, but you have to understand that you are now competing with that.
yeah,
That's kind of intimidating.
yeah,
There's, but, um, Yeah, so I think it is kind of, and I even for the store, thinking about being online and doing, being on Instagram, being on Facebook, and how do you get people excited about coming into the store and buying a book and whatever, and similar, not, not similar, um, like you're trying to sell a book and we're trying to sell lots of books, but there still is that thought of
Right.
how do you make that relationship with people? How do you build that following so that you get people
Right.
to get interested in, but
And we're not just competing with other books. We're competing with TV and movies and
yes, yeah,
concerts and comedy
yeah,
clubs and how many different ways people can
yes,
entertain
exactly.
themselves.
Yeah, yeah,
So, yeah, it's daunting.
yeah, it is.
Now, luckily, we don't need to, carve out 50% share in any market,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. You're not selling,
It's
bikes or printers or whatever. You're just selling
right.
a books.
Automobiles. Yes, we just need some people to buy a few books.
Yeah. What's been the most, maybe not the most, it doesn't have to be a superlative, a like fun, interesting, or encouraging encounter you've had with one of your readers or some of your readers?
um, yeah, I don't know if I'd call it fun, but again, when I talk about, well, there's two. I'll go with this one first, though. That when I talk to women about Valerie and hearing them say, so many women say, "Oh yeah, I've had that experience," or "I've had a similar experience," and it's just so common, and it's
Yeah,
disturbingly common. Um, but to hear them talk about, they like to see a strong woman, work through it, and it helps them in their own struggle. That's a great thing, and to hear them say, "It's good to see a guy get it."
yeah,
you know,
yeah,
um, a guy who gets it is a rare thing. But
yeah,
the other cool thing is on my first book on lying and judgment. When I tell people the premise and they say, "Ooh, I just
yeah,
love that," you know,
yeah. Oh, I mean, I think that
uh,
honestly is
it's
that's one of the best taglines for a book I think I've ever. Like you, every time you say that, I'm just like, oh, that's so good. You should probably say it since we haven't said it yet. People are like, what are you talking about?
oh yeah.
So
So in lying in judgment, a guy is serving on the jury of a murder trial for the crime that he committed.
that is, yeah, I love that. Every time it's like, oh, that's so good.
yeah,
And then
I'm
I
actually
was reading, I hadn't done this before when you were here. Gary was in the store on Saturday, and I was collecting some of his other back stock to put back on the shelves so that if people, read Valerie and want to go find some of his other work, that it will be there. And um, I had not read the flap copy for Lying in Vengeance,
oh
which, if you want to like say, the premise of that one too, yeah, that one was also good.
I have to see if I can do it cold without looking.
I put you on the spot. Oh
in,
no.
yeah, in Lying in Vengeance, the same character Peter, uh, uh, who had served on the jury, one of his fellow jurors has discovered his secret and is blackmailing him, threatening to expose his secret unless he kills someone that she needs out of her life,
Yeah.
her
Do this
former
again or
stalker.
I'll tell.
Yeah,
So yeah, no, you definitely need to go back and check out those two. So
and I'm working on just because I want to challenge myself because I've written plays, I've written books, obviously, and I've done a lot of tech writing, and I've never tried a screenplay. So I'm trying to
oh,
adapt Lying in Judgment to a screenplay,
oh,
and
that
I'm kind of
seems like it
stealing
would
from both
be
books.
good. Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
I mean, yeah, I think that's I mean, one of these days we'll have to get together, maybe if you get further along with it and talk about that, because I think it's really fascinating how um what an intellectual challenge it is to take something from a book, which most of us consume either visually because we're reading it and it's in our head, or we're hearing it. But it's
Mhm.
such a insular experience, like it's such a personal experience. You are either reading it or hearing it, and you're all the only, you're interacting with it, you're interpreting it, you're seeing whatever you're seeing in your head, and you are seeing what the characters are thinking or whatever. Taking that to a screen where it's more external, like you're seeing how the characters are behaving or what they're saying, but you can't see in their heads. I
Right.
think it's such an interesting exercise to adapt to screen.
It's a
Um,
very different writing format,
yeah,
you know, it's
yeah,
a completely different way of telling a story.
yeah. And I
Very
think
interesting.
that, from that stems a lot of our frustrations with, oh, they did a terrible job at that. The book was better.
Yeah.
And, sitting down and thinking about, why was it, why did I like that better? And what challenges did they face trying to make this into a screenplay? So, well, if you
Yeah.
get further along, we'll have to sit down and say, okay, what'd you have to think about it and all of that good stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be fun.
Yeah.
Reflect back
Well,
on that.
thank you so
And I
much,
think
Gary. Oh, go ahead. Sorry, I don't want to cut you
oh,
off.
I
Go
I
ahead.
was just gonna say, I think, audio is a even though it's the same book, it's an actual reading of the book
Yeah.
out loud. I've discovered that people who are listening to audiobooks tell me about how they experience it, and it feels very different.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I've listened to some audiobooks. It can feel very different because, and in particular, you mentioned how insular it is, but this one couple, actually the mayor of Camas and his wife, took a long drive, and they took
Yeah.
one of my audiobooks along and listened to it together. And they would then, go chapter by chapter and then talk about it. So it would be more of a shared experience as you
Oh,
go.
interesting.
And that's a
Yeah.
really different way, of experiencing a
Yeah.
book.
I think the one big difference, because I'm very defensive of people who, read books by listening to the audiobook, and the garbage they sometimes get from people who say that, that's not really reading. And it's like, yes, it is. You're still consuming this same story,
Mhm.
but it
Yeah,
is a different experience. It is a different experience because,
yeah,
an audiobook, listening to an audiobook narration is like listening to a performance.
right.
Whereas, reading it for yourself visually is a different, it's definitely a different way to intake a story, but you still are intaking the story. So,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
yeah, that's really fun.
So,
All right. Well, thank
all
you.
right.
I really, really appreciate you coming to talk to us, or
I
being here to
appreciate you
talk
having
to
me.
us.
Yeah.
And you can, in the store, we still have one copy of the most recent book, but we have the entire Valerie Dawes series, the Valor series. We have the Lying in Judgment and Lying in Vengeance. So if the idea of a guy serving on the jury for the murder that he committed sounds really good to you, we have those in the store. We also have Gary's Mountain Man series, which is also mystery. Um, so yeah, if you are wanting to jump in any of those series, we have them in the store. Next week, our next Vintage Books Live guest is Eileen Garvin, who is a writer from the Columbia River Gorge, who has written a book called Crow Talk, which came out earlier this year. And we also have a special edition of Vintage Books Live on Thursday night to celebrate Portland Book Week. And we have Sonia Thomas, who is a middle grade writer, and Emmeline Duncan and Angela M. Sanders, who are mystery writers. They're going to be hanging out. We're going to be talking about books and bookstores and all that good stuff. So join us then. And thank you again, Gary, for
Yeah.
being with us tonight.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, and say hello to Emmeline. We used to be in a writing group together.
Oh, awesome. We will do that. We definitely will
All
do
right.
that. Have a good night.
Yeah, you too.